Hi, my name's Annie Lucas and I run a sewing school called Start to Stitch. I hold face-to-face classes in Cornwall and I also have programmes available online. I volunteered to be the coordinator for Cornwall Scrubs when I realised there was a massive need for scrubs in our community as well as across the UK when I was part of the main For the Love of Scrubs group set up by the amazing Ashleigh Lindsell, an A&E nurse in the Midlands. And our group has grown and we have a huge quantity of volunteers all making scrubs for us, so I thought I would record a quick video just to help those of you who are struggling with your scrubs construction to understand the process a little bit better. So obviously with any make you begin by cutting out your pattern pieces. I'm not going to do a video on cutting out the whole pattern because many people will be using different patterns. They're all basically the same, but a lot of it also depends on your width. So there was just one or two things I wanted to be able to let you know about that I think are particularly important. One is that when you are cutting out your pattern pieces, you are aware of the grain line and that you're cutting your pattern piece. It's this double-headed arrow on the pattern piece here, that you're cutting your pattern piece on the grain line that's set by the pattern. That you check whether your pattern piece includes seam allowances or not. This one does. As you cut out, that you are careful to pay any attention to any markings or notches or balance marks that need to be transferred onto your fabric, and that you are mindful to do that. So this pattern has a notch at the bottom to indicate where you turn in at the vent on the side. This is the tunic top front, and I'll just whiz around here. Pattern cutting can be the most time-consuming bit of construction and the least interesting. And you can fast forward this if your group is providing you with pre-cut scrubs packs, as we are for our volunteers in Cornwall. Okay, so I've done that very hastily. On the scrubs top, you have got a pocket that needs to be placed in the correct position. So I just wanted to quickly show you what I would do for that. I have punched a hole in all four corners of the pocket piece on the pattern piece, and I'm just using a bit of chalk to go over that hole to transfer those corners. That one's just closed itself up a bit. Just using a piece of chalk to go through that hole into those corners so that that pocket piece is transferred. I just remove the pins quickly. I've got four dots that have been transferred, and you can then completely transfer your pocket piece with a piece of chalk so that you know that the placement is sound. Once you have done that on one side, you can turn over your tunic top. Before you unfold it, keep it folded, turn it over. A bit of fluff on my cutting table. Place your pattern piece back down exactly where you've cut it. Make sure everything is aligned. And then you can reverse the process and do the pocket placement on the other side of the tunic. The first thing you need to do before you start assembling your scrubs is to interface the two facings that have come in your pattern piece. There will be a front facing and a back neck facing. Cut two pieces of fusible interfacing, lightweight to medium fusible interfacing that are the same size as your facing pieces. Place that glue side down onto the fabric piece. It depends what interfacing you're using as to how you identify the glue side down, but it essentially will either be bobbly with little blobs of glue, or it be slightly shiny. Read your manufacturer's instructions for that. Lay a pressing cloth on top and then give it a good press to fuse the facing together. Like that. And then repeat for your front neck facing, which you've cut on the fold. So having put the fusible interfacing onto your facing pieces, you're now going to assemble your neckline facing. So that will just involve 2 pins on the shoulder pieces, making sure that they line up. And then stitch at a 1 centimetre seam allowance along this straight edge and this straight edge, making sure that you back tack at the beginning and end of each line of stitching. Having stitched your 2 facing pieces together, at the shoulder seams, press the seams open and flat like this. So I just wanted to have a quick word about finishing your seams. If you're making scrubs for hospitals, they need to be able to sustain prolonged hot washing, and that gives a certain degree of wear and tear to the seams on the inside. So on your seams on the inside of your scrubs, you will have raw edges like this. On a domestic machine, if you don't have an overlocker, you would normally just finish that with a zigzag stitch, but we are not asking our volunteers to do that because I don't feel that that is robust enough to withstand the hot washing. So if you have an overlocker, please feel free to overlock the insides of your scrubs. However, if you have an overlock stitch on your domestic machine, you may also use that. And the most important thing is that the overlocking stitch encases the outside edge of the raw fabric. So I'll just show you what I mean. I've got mine set to an overlock stitch. And it's puckering the fabric slightly, but you can see that hopefully as I was sewing you could see that the right hand needle drop goes over the edge of the fabric, and the left hand needle drop, so the right hand needle drop is going over the edge of the fabric and the left hand needle drop is going into the fabric, and in that way you are completely using the stitch to encase the raw edges of the seam in much more of an effective way than a plain zigzag stitch would do. Once you have pressed open the seams on your facing piece, you need to overlock all the way around the edge. And whilst you're there, you need to overlock down the 2 side seams on each of your sleeve pieces. You've got 2, and around the 2 side edges and the bottom edge of your 4 pocket pieces, and also down the 2 side seams of your tunic top. Once you've done all that overlocking, you can start to assemble your tunic top. So line your front and back pieces right sides together, although on the polycotton the right side is hardly discernible from the wrong side, but if you've marked your pocket markings onto the front of your tunic, that would be your right side, because you wouldn't want to put them on the inside. Pin them together at the shoulders, and then as you did with the neck facing, do a 1 centimetre seam with a 1 centimetre seam allowance with back tacking at the beginning and the end, and then once you've done that, overlock the 2 seams together and press them to face towards the back of the garment. Once you have completed your seams, overlock them and press them so that they're facing the back of the garment, we're now going to insert the facing. So take your facing piece and place it over the neckline, right sides together, and pin first at the shoulders and then down in the V, as these are all places where it should line up. And then once you've anchored it in those places, you can pin all the way around the neckline and stitch it together at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Once you've stitched around the neck hole, you need to put some space into the curved area so that you can turn it through. So cut right into the V, taking care to line up the nose of your scissors with the stitching and not to cut in completely so that you don't accidentally cut all the way through. You'll also need to put some notches into these curved areas around the back neckline. The V is straight, so won't need any notching, and then pay particular attention to where you've seamed at the shoulders because it's likely to pucker there. Once you've done that, you can turn your facing through and then be careful to roll this to really roll the seams out so that you're right on the seam line as you've turned it through, and then give it a really good press, which is what I've already done. Yours won't look like this when you pull it through, but I've given it now a really good press. Once you have pressed your facing, you need to top stitch 3 centimetres away from the neckline. You can do that in a number of ways. You can mark it out using a gauge like this. I've got that has a 3 centimetre mark on it all the way around, and just gently use the chalk to be able to mark your stitch line. Or you can use the 3 centimetre seam allowance line on the base plate of your sewing machine. The next thing that you're going to do is place your pockets onto the tunic, and before you can do that you need to finish the pocket tops and the pocket sides. So the first thing you need to do is to fold the top edge of your pocket down by 1 centimetre and then fold it again down by 2 centimetres and give it a jolly good press. Once you've pressed it, you need to top stitch all the way along as close to the edge of the folded edge as you can, remembering to back tack at the beginning and end of the seam. So we're now going to put the pockets onto the tunic. The first thing you need to do before you can stitch them onto the tunic top is to press 1.5 centimetres in down the 2 overlocked edges and the overlock bottom, so that those edges are all neatly pressed and folded in, and then put the pocket piece on your tunic top where you've marked it. And pin it in place. Then you need to top stitch all the way around these 3 edges. But at the top you will need to do an element of reinforcement. So whether you do a satin stitch, kind of bar tack at the top, or whether you do a little triangular stitch at the top is up to you. But at the top of the pocket it's going to need more reinforcement than a straight back tack, because this particular area of a pocket gets a lot of wear and tear as things are being pushed in and out of it. The next thing we're going to do, having put our pockets in place, is to put the sleeves in. Not all patterns have the double and single notch at the front and back of the sleeve piece and the armhole that you would normally get on commercial patterns. So just a quick crib as to how you can tell the front and the back. Some sleeves are completely symmetrical, so it won't matter, but on the pattern I'm using there is a slight differential in the curve of the sleeve. You fold your sleeve in half, seam to seam, and down the centre line of the pattern piece, and you'll see that there is this slight differential. The curve is deeper on one side and slightly kind of fatter on the other. This fatter curve goes at the back of the sleeve, and this shallower curve goes at the front, and that's because of the way that your arm is built and because of movement. So you generally, all your arm most of your arm movements will be going forward, so you need a more space for your arm to move forward, and as your arm moves forward you need extra material or ease around the back of the armhole in order to allow the arm to move in the forwards position. So I've established that this curve here on the top of my folded sleeve piece is the front, so I'm going to open that up. And then you can start to pin your sleeve into place, lining up the seams as you go. So pin each of the side seams, so that you've lined it up there, and then you also need to find your center line on your sleeve. So I'll just fold that in half again so that I can find the center line on my sleeve and line up that central mark with the shoulder seam. Making sure that the overlocked seam that you press towards the back of the garment remains pressed towards the back of the garment before you stitch it in place, and then pin all the way along the sleeve opening, making sure that the sleeve is absolutely flush with the armhole on your main tunic back. And once you've done that, stitch it into place with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, back tacking at the beginning and end, and then overlock the 2 raw edges together just as you did at the shoulder seam. We're now going to assemble your scrubs down the side seams. So line your scrubs front and back together, first at the underarm seam and then at the hem of the sleeve and then at the bottom of the curve of the vent, just so that you know everything is lined up, and then pin along the side seam and stitch. But you need to stop some distance away from the bottom of the pattern, of the bottom of the piece, and that will depend, that distance will vary according to which pattern that you're using. So stitch all the way down, like as I have done, all the way down that side seam to the top of the vent, because what you're then going to do is press that seam open and press the vent open in one continuous line so that it lies nice and flat. Once you've pressed it open, pin the vent in place. And then top stitch 2 centimetres around the opening so that the vent is neatly stitched in place. Go up the vent, up into a point and down and back down the other side again. Once you have stitched your vents, the final thing you need to do is to hem your tunic front and back, and also the sleeve of your tunic. How you do that will depend very much on what pattern you are using. On mine, it has a 1 centimetre, well, it's 2 centimetres folded up and then tucked in by 1 centimetre to create a 1 centimetre hem, double turn back and top stitch. So I've basically folded that in by 2 centimetres and pressed it, and then folded that back in on itself by 1 centimetre and pressed it, and I'm going to top stitch along to finish back tacking at the beginning and at the end. On the pattern I'm using for the sleeve, it's a 3cm hem, so having folded it up and pressed 3cm, I would now fold it back down again by 1cm just to tuck that in, pin it in place, and then top stitch all the way around both sleeve hems. And when you have done that, you've finished your scrubs top and you can move on to your trousers. So moving on to the trousers, the first thing you need to do before you assemble your trouser front and back is to place the pockets on the markings that you made when you were doing your cutting out, and then top stitch them in exactly the same way as you did onto the tunic top. Once you've stitched the pockets onto the back trouser leg pieces, you're going to put the front pocket bag into the front pocket pieces. There are variations in patterns with this, but on the pattern I'm using, there is an inset pocket opening in the side of the seam. Sorry, that's my daughter in the background. We're all working with kids at home, aren't we? So there's an inset pocket opening in the side of the seam, and the same with the pocket bag. So I'm just lining those up and pinning them together. If your pattern has pocket bags but there aren't any kind of there isn't an obvious opening in the pattern piece to line them up with the front bag, front pocket opening, sorry, then just lay the pocket bag over the opening with the outside seams aligning with each other, and once you've seamed it, cut in. That will make sense in a minute. So I'm just pinning these pocket bag fronts into the pocket opening in the side seam of the trousers front pieces, and I'm going to now stitch those in place with a 1cm seam allowance and back tacking at the beginning and at the end. So once you have stitched around the pocket opening on the front pocket bag and the front trouser leg piece, you need to notch into the corners to make some space so that you can turn that pocket bag through. Turn it through and give it a really good press, as I have done, which is why this is nice and flat around the pocket opening. I need to just line those up a bit better. And then once you've done that, top stitch around 1 centimetre around that opening just to hold it in place. Once you've turned it through and top stitched, you need to have place your trouser leg down on the inside of the trouser leg piece and place your pocket bag back on top of the pocket bag front and pin all the way around the long curved edge. You're going to stitch these two pocket bag pieces front and back together with around a 1 centimetre seam allowance, just around the curved edge, and also then overlock them together once you've completed the curved edge. You're not stitching anything to the trouser piece itself. This is remaining loose and baggy, and just be careful where you are stitching at the opening, the pocket opening in the side seam, because you will need to make sure that your trouser leg is folded nicely back and away underneath in order to ensure that you're not stitching it when you start and when you finish. Once you have stitched and overlocked around the pocket bags, you need to assemble each trouser leg. So put your trouser front piece on top of your trouser back piece, right sides together, so the patch pocket is on the inside and the pocket opening is also on the inside, with the pocket bag on top, because facing you, because actually this is what's facing you is the wrong side of the fabric. And then pin all the way down that seam being extra specially careful around the pocket opening in the side seam. Keep pinning all the way down the length of the leg, and then once you've done that, stitch at a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and again overlock the two raw edges together, and do that on both trouser legs. Once you've stitched the outside of your trouser legs together and overlocked, press the seam open with the seam facing towards the back of the trouser leg. Having done that, you want to then sew the inside leg seam of each leg. So this trouser leg is folded in half with the inside seams lining up with each other. And just as you did before, you want to pin all the way down the inseam, lining everything up, stitch at a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and then overlock the raw edges together. The final step in completing the basic assembly of your trousers before we move on to finishing them is to join the legs together at the crotch and front and back rise. So you have pressed your inner crotch seams facing towards the back, as you have done on the side seams as well. So pin together at where the inside leg seam meets, and then pin together at the end of the front rise, and also at the end of the back rise. And then just to make sure all your pieces line up, and then pin all the way along the curves. Just fill in the pinning all the way along the curves before you do exactly what you've just done, which is stitching these two pieces together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and then overlocking the two pieces together. Once you have stitched your two trouser legs together, you can press the seam and let the seam allowance go to either side. It doesn't really matter. The next step is to fold down the top of your trousers by 1 centimetre and press. I have just done that by eye. Hi darling, yeah, I've just done that by eye, but my gauge says that it is about right. And then I'm going to press that down again, this time by 2 centimetres, because I have a 1.5 centimetre waist tape. So I'm going to press that down now by 2 centimetres. Now obviously you need to do this all the way around the top of your waistband, but I'm just going to do it in the middle section here, because the next thing you need to do is reinforce the waistband so that we can put some buttonholes on the waistband for the drawstring to be able to come out. So I know that my waistband is going to go down to about there, and I need to reinforce this area here with a strip of interfacing, which I'm just going to stick over the seam, put down my pressing cloth and press into place. Like that. Once you have got your interfacing in place, you need to mark where your buttonholes will be so that the draw cords can pull out. So I'm just going to use the 1.5 centimetre mark on my gauge to just mark them around 1.5 centimetres from the centre seam. on the interfacing side. Once I've done that, I'm going to then make those into buttonholes. I've just made my buttonhole. I'm just going to show you how to open it up. So the way I do it is to put a pin across the end and then to use my stitch ripper, stab this end closest to me, and then use the stitch ripper to slice the buttonhole open. And the pin at the end stops the buttonhole from, stops the quick unpick from slicing all the way through. And there you've got your buttonhole for your drawstring. Once you've done that, you need, and you've got both your buttonholes open, you need to go back to your crease marks from your waistband that you pre-marked. Just check that your buttonholes are in approximately the right place, and pin all the way around the waistband at the bottom to prepare to top stitch the waistband down all the way around the waist of the scrubs before you thread your waist tape in. Before you put your draw cord in, you just need to hem the trouser legs. So on my pattern, that is a 2 centimetre, it's a 2 centimetre turn up with a 1 centimetre tuck back in. So it's a total of 3 centimetres folded up, just as you did on the tunic top. And then your trousers are pretty much finished with the exception of the insertion of the draw cord. So you have your 2 buttonholes centre front. I'm just going to use a safety pin now to thread the draw cord all the way through. You feel it all the way along, push it through and thread it all the way through the waistband. You will need to edge your draw cord to stop it from fraying. You may find that the width of your draw cord is actually too narrow for your machine to be able to push it through. With the feed dogs, may not be able to get enough of a grip to be able to propel it through. So there are a number of different things you can do, and it's best probably to refer to your individual group coordinator as to how they would like the draw cord finished if you are making scrubs as part of the For the Love of Scrubs movement. A lot of it depends on whether you're using tape or cord or anything like that. I will probably just turn, now that that's all threaded through, just pull it so it's evenly spread in the trousers. And now that that is pulled through, I will finish this by folding up a couple of centimetres and doing a running stitch along the top, because in that way the draw cord will be able to catch the catch underneath the foot on the freed dogs and feed through. But you could also turn it over and do a couple of stitches by hand, or you could also tie it in a knot. It's entirely up to you. Don't forget to size your garments by putting a size label in the back. If you have pre-printed size labels, you can put them in the back just underneath the waistband turnover when you get to that stage. I don't have any pre-printed labels, so I'll be just embroidering XL onto the back of the trouser legs and the tunic top as a finishing touch, so that the hub for Cornwall knows what size they are. So that's it. That's how you make a pair of scrubs. I really hope that you have found this video helpful and in support of the written instructions that you've got for the pattern that you're making.
Mummy.
Yes, darling?
Stop.
Stop. I know, but I don't want you to fall off. As all of us are working at home with children at the moment, we're all struggling a little bit. So thank you for persevering with any strange noises in the background. You want to get on the chair? Yeah? Okay. And I just wanted to thank everybody who is sewing for Cornwall Scrubs in particular for all of their energy and enthusiasm. It's been really overwhelming, and I know we're making a massive difference through what we're doing. If you've liked this video, every now and again I do another online class. So just find me on social media at Start to Stitch and give me a follow, but if you want to stay in touch. But other than that, just again, my absolute heartfelt thanks to you for everything that you have been doing in order to help us fulfil the need for our healthcare workers.
Good girl.
Please.